Hello again everyone, and welcome back to Japan Vintage Camera, where today I'm going to be doing a video reply to a question which I frequently get here on my YouTube channel and also at my online stores, and that is to explain the difference between the different Yashica Electro 35 cameras. And I don't mean all of the Yashica Electro 35s, because Yashica made a large variety of these cameras, from the really tiny MC to the more sophisticated GL, CC, GX and such. But the most popular camera was the classic Electro 35, and I happen to have the 4 different variations here, and I'm going to go ahead and just explain the differences between these cameras as they evolved over time. Because they were introduced in 1966 with the first version here, which I'm touching right now, the regular Electro 35. And then that was improved into what was called the Electro 35G. And then the G became the GS, and then the GS became the GSN. And as time went by and technology improved, of course, the cameras improved as well. And in this video, I'm just going to explain the differences between the different cameras and what you can expect if you're looking for one, and what advantages one camera will have over the other. So first, I'll go ahead and move these other ones out of the way so I just have one camera in front of me, the first one. And I'll go ahead and just give you a general overview of the Yashica Electro 35. It was introduced in 1966 and at the time was the most advanced camera in the world. And what made it so advanced was its brain, which is what Yashica called it in their marketing material. Yashica was able to construct a very simple, I don't think I can call it a computer, but an electronic exposure control system which utilized a number of transistors, which took the light signal from the cadmium sulfide light meter cell and ran it through the electronic system into an electronically controlled shutter inside the camera. And what made this unique is that it was fully electronic and it was stepless, which was it was the only camera at the time which had an automatic stepless shutter. What this means is that if you look at most cameras, old cameras, you'll look at them, you'll see they have an aperture ring which moves in steps. And they have a shutter speed ring which also moves in steps. And these steps are mathematical. Each step is double the previous step, or half of the previous step, depending on which direction you're going. So 1 second to 1/2 a second, to 1/4 of a second, to 1/8 of a second, to a 1/16 of a second, and so on. They have steps between these. So 1/25th, 1/250th, 1/500th, 1/1000th. And when you take a light meter reading, you kind of set the shutter speed which is closest to that which the light meter recommends. But with the stepless shutter, it allows the shutter to operate between steps. So if I have a camera and it's recommending a certain EV number, and say that could be somewhere in between 1/50th or 1/100th of a second on my shutter, I have to set the shutter to either 1/50th or 1/100th. Whereas the Yashica Electro can choose the precise shutter speed. So if the best shutter speed for the light is, say, 1/72nd of a second, that's what the Yashica Electro 35 will operate the shutter at. And this is an incredibly accurate system, and it made this camera especially well suited to slide film, which was very popular at the time. It's quite an amazing system, and despite the fact that this system is 50, 54, 55, 56 years, something like that, it still works very well today. Other unique things about the camera were a very wonderful lens, a 45mm f1.7 lens, which was an evolution over the earlier lenses which came in cameras like the Lynx 14 or the Minister 700. Then there was the design of the camera itself, which is pretty much kind of a block of metal, like a brick cut in half with a lens stuck on the front, with the windows and the controls lined up on it. And for whatever reason, this style was very appealing to people. It was appealing back in those days, and it still remains appealing today. I've sold lots and lots and lots of Yashica cameras in my store. I can't count how many Electro 35s I've run through over the last dozen years that I've been selling these things. They have a really classic style to them. They feel really well in the hand. They have a very smooth operating system. They're just a wonderful camera. And it was such a wonderful combination of performance and style that Yashica produced them for more than 10 years and made more than 8 million of them, which is quite a feat. Just the fact that the camera stays on the market that long says that there has to be something really good about it. So now I've given you kind of the overview of the camera. I'll go ahead and talk about the different features of each particular one and how you can identify them, or I guess identify between the different versions. The first version, the easiest way to tell it is by the film winding lever, which is all metal. The later variations had a black plastic tip, which was, I don't know, I can't say that it's actually easier to use than the metal version, but it was plastic. I don't know if it was less expensive or if it was just more modern styling. Plastic was also a kind of a technological advancement in those days. So that's the first giveaway. The second giveaway, which is obvious, is this kind of white silver bezel around the metering lights. This was changed to black in the later cameras. The earliest version, like here, has the word turn on the top, and it has two lamps, and at each lamp there's an arrow pointing one way or the other. It's very simple to understand. The top one is for slow, and the red one is for over. So if you are shooting in the camera, it's a small aperture and it's not very bright outside, this yellow lamp will likely light up. And what that means is that the camera is going to select a shutter speed below 1/30th of a second. And it's very hard to hold a camera and get a nice clean shot at such a low shutter speed. You're probably going to get a little bit of blur as the camera moves. So this warns you that it's going to take a long exposure, and so to get a better exposure you should turn the aperture ring this way. And we have an arrow on the top, and you can kind of see the arrows here. They match together. We have a yellow arrow with the yellow arrow next to the yellow light. And you simply turn this until the light goes off, and that means the shutter speed will fire faster than 1/30th of a second. On the opposite end of the scale, if you open the aperture really wide, say to f1.7, and it's really sunny outside, the overlight is going to come on. And what that means is that the shutter can't fire fast enough for the amount of light that is available. So in order for the shutter to work properly, you have to close down the aperture. And you simply close, following the arrows here, turn the red arrow here to the right, following the arrow here until the red light goes out. And then you can safely take a photograph. So long as neither of the lights is lit up on the top of the camera, you can take a photograph and it will be properly exposed. Moving to the back of the camera, another difference which these earlier ones have is the battery check lamp is actually on the back and the battery check button is here. One thing about the lamps on the camera, the battery check lamp and the meter lamps, these are ordinary incandescent bulbs, like the kind they used as flashlights in the old days and some of the new days, and they do burn out. So there are three causes to lamp failures, and they can fail, any of these can fail at any time. The first cause is, of course, the light bulb is burned out. And you can buy the proper light bulb on Amazon with the leads, and you can put it in, or you can find a donor camera, and all of them, both meter lamps and the check lamp, use the exact same bulb. So you can, if you've got an old camera, one that doesn't work or is broken, you can use the bulbs. They're soldered onto the wire, so you have to kind of cut the wires a little bit of distance from the bulb, and then you can solder them in place where after removing the old bulb, and it'll work fine. The burned out bulb is the first cause. In regards to the battery check lamp, on these old cameras, sometimes it doesn't work simply because you're not pushing the button in far enough. Now, this is an old camera and it has a plastic bezel here, and over time it kind of warps and pushes outward, and there gets to be kind of a gap. You can stick your finger under here, your fingernail under, and what that does is it makes the distance greater between the check button and the check switch. So you might have to push the button in really deep for the lamp to light up. The last cause, if you have a good battery but the battery check lamp isn't working, is that it's not the right battery. Now, you can get an A32PX6 battery from Amazon, and that will work fine with this camera without an adapter, or you can get an adapter where you can use an LR44 or SR44 battery. If you use one of those batteries, the battery check lamp will work. But if you use the PX style battery, I forget the exact one, but it looks like an LR44 battery, the camera will work, the meter lamps will work, but the battery check lamp does not work. It's kind of an odd, quirky thing with that particular battery. And these batteries used to be more popular, say 10 years ago, and when I was selling these cameras, I'd often have complaints the battery check lamp isn't working. And pretty much in every case, the cause was just the battery itself and not the check lamp. Another thing I want to point out to people who might be having issues with these cameras, especially those who buy one from me and are having trouble making it work, always make sure that you have the battery put in the right way. It's very easy to put the battery in backwards in these cameras. The battery, the positive side, the red end of the battery, depending on what kind of battery or adapter you're using, has to point toward the battery cap. Otherwise, the camera will not work. If you put the battery in backwards, the check lamp will work, but the camera will not work. And you'll probably think that there's something wrong with the camera. There's some kind of issue with it. What the issue is, more than 90% of the time, is the battery is just in backwards. So take the battery out, put it back in. They have two ways to warn you to put it in the right way, because this has been a problem with these cameras ever since they came out. People put the battery in backward. On the battery cap, there's a sticker on the inside which has a plus on it to remind you the plus side has to go that way. And if you look inside the battery chamber, there's a second sticker showing the battery and which direction it's supposed to go. And despite the fact that there are two warnings on here, people continuously put the battery in backwards, and I'm ashamed to say that I've done it myself a few times and scratched my head until oh yeah, that's right, I got to check the battery. I turn it around and the camera works fine. So another interesting thing about these cameras is there's a cutout in the bottom on the earlier versions, and to open the film door there's a catch on the bottom where my thumb is. This was moved to the rewind knob in the later variations. The earlier variations you open like the earlier Lynx or Minister cameras. So let's go ahead and move to the next camera, and that is going to be the Electro 35G, which is nearly identical to the original Electro 35, except with the addition of this plastic tip on the lever and the black bezel around the exposure lights, as I mentioned before. The operation of this camera is exactly the same. Another difference between this camera and the other one is that the film speed range has been increased slightly to 500 ASA, and that was to allow for more exposure compensation. You can't buy ASA 500 film, they've never made it, but some people like to shoot the film a little bit hotter, a little bit cooler, a little bit, to suit their particular taste. But it's also important to be able to do this in situations where you're trying to take a picture of something which is white or something which is black. So pretty much all old cameras with a built-in light meters, they don't like to see things in black or white. They kind of try to average them out. So if you're taking a photograph of something which is white, you're going to need to increase the exposure for it to actually look white. And if you're taking a picture of something which is black, you need to decrease the exposure so it actually looks black. And you can do that by simply turning this dial one or two clicks either way. So if I'm on a ski vacation and I'm taking pictures of my kids in the ski, I'll go ahead and turn it a couple of clicks to increase the exposure. I'll slow it down to a slower speed, and that will let the aperture stay open, or the shutter open longer. And if I'm taking, say, a picture of someone wearing a new black coat, I'll go ahead and turn it a couple of stops the other way, and that way the black coat will actually look black and not gray. Another reason this is important is when using filters. Now, most cameras meter through the lens or through a light meter which is located within the filter ring. The Yashica Electro 35 meter is located outside, and this was because of its orientation to the computer brain, which was built into the camera. So in order to use a filter, you have to compensate for the filter. Now, if you buy a new filter, inside the filter box, you'll find a card which tells you how much you have to compensate, and you just do that by turning down to a slightly lower film speed, and that increases the compensation and allows the meter to see the same amount of light which the film is going to see. This camera, of course, retains the same locking system for the shutter button, and it has the same battery check lamp on the back, and it has the same operation for the door and film loading. You have to pull up like so. All right, moving along, we'll go to the other improved version, and this was the GS. Now, the GS had some great improvements to it. Starting with the G and into the GS and later cameras, the electronic contacts inside the camera were gold-plated. And that was the contacts for the auto switch, for the aperturing, and for the shutter mechanism. And this was for a few reasons. First was the gassing of the original mercury batteries. The original batteries, as mercury, and they emit a kind of a corrosive gas, which would get on the contacts inside the camera, and that would cause kind of a spotty contact situation. You can find that in these cameras, even the later versions. By when you push down the shutter button about halfway, sometimes you'll hear funny sounds, like buzzing sounds or squeaking, but weird odd noises coming from the camera. And sometimes the exposure lights flicker a little bit. For whatever reason, even though these flicker and make noise, the camera will still operate the shutter at the correct speed, but these kind of problems can be annoying to people, and they think that there's something wrong with the camera. The gold contacts inside the camera greatly reduced this problem, but it still happens. But fortunately, clearing up this problem is very easy. What you do is there are 3 screws on the bottom of the camera. You can remove these 3 screws with a Phillips screwdriver. And if you look on the front of the camera, we have the shutter release button, and you just kind of think of an imaginary line running to the bottom of the camera. And if you remove the bottom cover, you'll kind of see a switch, which is fastened to the back of this panel here with wires soldered to it. That is the shutter switch. So what you do is you put some drops of naphtha or Zippo lighter fluid or whatever you have like that. Put quite a few drops on it, and then turn the camera upward and hold the shutter like this and just cycle the shutter a few times. And the fluid and the friction of the levers will clean off any gunk which is on the contacts. And then the buzzing and funny noises will go away, and so will the flickering lights. It's a very quick fix to this issue, and it takes only a minute or so to do. When you're done, make sure to put the bottom cover on with the 3 screws, and it will work smoothly and quietly without that issue. The other thing which this camera has was an increase in the film speed capability up to ASA 1000. Of course, they don't make 1000 film anymore than they make 8 or 500 film, but once again, this was just an issue of for exposure compensation. You can use the Portra 800 film in this camera because it has an 800 ASA setting. The GS was the first camera which featured the combined film door release and unified loading system, which kind of it was a little bit more complicated to make this mechanism in the camera, but it did make film loading easier, and also simplified the design of the bottom of the camera. And of course, this was carried on through the rest of the series. There were 2 variations of the GS camera made. There was an early variation. This is the earlier variation. You can tell because it has this silvery sticker on the back and the chrome around the button. The later version just had a black plastic system. And another difference between the 2 is the bezel around the viewfinder. On the earlier variation, is made of metal. It was a die-cast zinc with of course, the glass window and a metal plate on the back, and the glass is sandwiched in between the 2. When I am servicing these cameras, I always remove this glass so I can clean it properly. It makes the viewfinder clear, and it makes the camera look better, more new than if it's kind of dirty around the edges. On these cameras, this is a little more tricky to do because when you remove the top cover, there's a little metal clip. You have to pop that off, and then you have to pull this out because it's glued in a little bit. Then you have to take out a small set screw to separate the front bezel and rear bezel. Then you take out the glass and clean it. Then you put the glass back, put the bezels back together, slide it back into the front of the camera. Then you have to really play for a while to get that little metal clip back in because it doesn't like to go back in easily. And then you have to put a drop of glue on the clip to make sure that it doesn't come out. The later ones were just plastic, and the rear plate and the glass were held in with the plastic just melted over the ends. I just cut off the plastic with a pair of nippers, remove the glass and the rear plate, clean everything up, put it back, and just put a drop of glue, and it holds it in place perfectly. The 2 variations, they look a little bit different, but the operation is exactly the same. The last variation, of course, was the Yashica GSN, and this is identical to the Yashica GS with the exception of a shoe added for the flash. Now, strobe flashes became popular in the late 60s and into the 70s, and these allowed you to do a lot more with the cameras. Earlier cameras, the earliest Yashicas came with a flash gun which used bulbs, and you of course have to change the bulb every time you take a photograph. With the strobe flash, you could use it multiple times. You just have to wait a moment for the strobe to charge up. And also, people were getting really creative with flash photography back in the days, and Yashica produced a number of flashes for these cameras as well as flash adapters. So they could have an adapter where you could use multiple flashes with these Yashica cameras, and that made these cameras quite useful when you were shooting in the studio. Other things about the Yashica GSN, one difference between the earlier ones and the later ones is the lens. The later ones from the GS and GSN say color Yashinon. The earlier ones just say Yashinon DX without the color. Supposedly there's a difference between the lenses which makes them color corrected. Honestly, I can't tell the difference between them. I've interchanged the lenses on the different models and they seem to perform the same. It's more of a marketing thing. There may have been some different variations in the coating of the lens, but that's nothing that I can obviously see. Another difference was the GSN was also manufactured in Hong Kong as well as Japan. It's very easy to identify the Hong Kong version because on the front, instead of saying Yashinon DX whatever Japan, it will say lens made in Japan. So the lens is made in Japan, but the rest of the camera is made in Hong Kong. Another way to tell a Hong Kong camera is that the chrome finish is a more matte finish. It's not as shiny or reflective as the Japanese-made camera. The shutter speed ring is constructed a little bit differently. It's actually made of plastic on the inside instead of brass. Actually, the plastic is a little bit superior because it doesn't corrode like the brass does, and it operates a little bit more smoothly. Another telltale thing is obviously the H next to the serial number, whereas the Japanese version has a serial number and it says Japan. In regards to performance, they work exactly the same, and as both cameras have the exact same lens, you're going to get the exact same photos. The Japanese versions might get a little bit of a premium over the Hong Kong versions, though that's not really necessary. Here in Japan, the Hong Kong versions are extremely rare. In other countries, they might be more common. Here in Japan, people prefer to buy the Japanese cameras. So, I guess that's about all I can say about these cameras, pointing out the differences. I have other videos on the Yashica GS and GSN and such, and pretty much if you need more information that I didn't share here, you can find it on my other videos. These are simply a superb camera, superb lens, superb operating system. These are suitable for beginners or even professionals. They're capable of taking really amazing photographs. They're pretty much foolproof. They very rarely suffer from any serious problems other than the occasional burnt out bulb. The POD or pad of death is an issue in them. The cameras which I sell, I always make sure that it's replaced. Another issue these cameras sometimes have is the focusing helicoid can become stuck. That's a common problem with these old cameras. You can usually fix this most times by heating up the camera with a hairdryer till it's really hot, and that kind of softens the lubricant and allows you to turn the focusing ring and get whatever debris was inside out of the way. And if you don't have access to a hairdryer, just sit it in the sun for a couple of hours on a hot day and that will do the same thing. That's pretty much it. A really wonderful, stylish camera, easy to use with a wonderful lens. I can't recommend them enough. I've been selling these cameras in my online stores for more than a dozen years now. Literally thousands of these things have gone through my hands. I really love them. Anyway, I'm running out of time here. I have a time limit on the camera I'm using to shoot this video, and I don't want to be cut off before it reaches that limit, so I'm going to go ahead and end the video here, besides the fact that I've got some other stuff to do. If you want to see more videos, please subscribe, and you'll be able to know when they come out. If anyone has any questions about the Yashica Electro 35, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. If anyone has any information which I didn't include in the video, please feel free to add that as well. And if you like this video, please click the like button. That always helps. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you tune in again soon.